The last sirens don't sound like victory. They sound like nothing. Because the first real morning after a global war wouldn't feel cinematic. It would feel wrong. Like the world is still there, but the invisible engine that made it work just got ripped out overnight. You'd wake up and the street would look familiar, buildings still standing, cars still parked, birds still doing bird stuff. But the systems would be gone or fractured, phones would be unreliable or dead, the grid would be unstable, water pressure would be inconsistent, stores would be dark, deliveries wouldn't show, government announcements might not come, not because nobody cares, but because the people in charge are dealing with the same confusion, the same shortages, the same broken chain of command. And that's the part most people miss. Civilization isn't only held together by laws and flags and speeches. It's held together by quiet, boring threads that work so smoothly we stop noticing them. Fuel moving, food moving, parts moving, payments clearing, water being pumped, repair crews showing up, routine. When those threads snap, the world doesn't end. It becomes a different planet. This is a scenario breakdown, not a prediction, and definitely not a timeline you can set a clock by. But if you've ever wondered what the world might look like right after the big one, not a wasteland everywhere, but a planet forced into survival mode, here's the most realistic way it changes. First, the silence would be logistical. No steady news cycle. No normal banking, no normal shipping, no easy way to move goods across borders. The global supply chain, the thing that keeps modern life stocked and smooth, doesn't degrade slowly. It breaks in chunks. Trade would stall. Fuel would become limited and guarded. Some ports would be closed or destroyed. Others would be operating at a fraction of normal capacity. Insurance for transport would skyrocket if insurance even still meant anything. And without reliable fuel and safe routes, ships and trucks don't move like they used to. That means the countries that weren't hit directly still feel the shock like a punch to the chest. Because modern nations don't run on self-sufficiency, they run on flow. If the flow stops, even a wealthy country turns fragile fast. The next change would be political, but not the way people imagine. It wouldn't be treaties and grand negotiations at first. It would be fragmentation inside the borders. Big nations tend to rely on communication and coordination to stay unified. If those systems get damaged, if the center can't talk to the edges, local power fills the vacuum. Not necessarily because people want to break away, but because someone has to make decisions right now about food, security, medical care, and water. So you'd see regions start acting like their own countries, even if they still claim the same flag. State governments, provincial governments, local military commands, emergency councils, mayors, whoever can actually keep the lights on and the water moving. In places with strong emergency planning culture, you'd see faster stabilization. Not comfort, not back to normal, but a calmer kind of order. Rationing, curfews, controlled fuel use, organized distribution. In places that were already tense, divided, or stretched thin, you'd see more chaos. Not because people are bad, but because scarcity magnifies everything that was already cracked. Now zoom out and look at the map. After a global war, the new map isn't drawn by ink first. It's drawn by necessity. Power becomes less about how many jets you have and more about three boring things. Water, food, stable land. If you can secure clean water, produce calories, and keep a core area stable, you become a center of gravity. People migrate toward you, trade routes form around you, and your influence grows, even if you never wanted it. That's why inland agricultural regions would suddenly matter more. Not because they're glamorous, but because they can feed people without needing the whole planet to cooperate. The other big shift is this: distance becomes expensive again. In the old world, you can manage a huge country because information and fuel make distance feel small. When fuel is scarce and communication is shaky, a nation the size of a continent becomes harder to hold together. Regions drift, local alliances form. It's not ideology, it's practicality. And then there's the population pressure problem. Some countries depend on constant imports to keep massive cities fed. If trade stalls and transport breaks, coastal megacities become pressure cookers. You'd likely see movement out of dense urban areas toward places with land, water, and lower stress. Not everyone can move, many won't, but even a small percentage moving is enough to change everything. So what does government look like in that world? It gets smaller and more local. The first governments to struggle aren't always the weak ones. They're the ones built on centralized control, instant communication, and top-down obedience. That model doesn't do well when the signal goes dark and the roads don't move. In the early phase, whoever controls logistics becomes leadership, not the best speaker, not the most famous person. The person who can get water delivered, the person who can coordinate fuel, the person who can keep clinics running, the person who can organize security without turning everything into a warlord circus. You'd see a mix depending on culture. In some places, the military becomes the backbone of stability. In others, religious networks. In others, local councils and community organizations that already have trust. And trust becomes a huge currency. Because in a broken world, people don't follow slogans. They follow whoever makes life possible. Now let's talk about money, because this is where everything gets real. Money only works when the system behind it works. Banks don't have to be destroyed for money to stop functioning the way people expect. If the grid is unstable, if networks are down, if supply is scarce, money becomes less powerful than usefulness. The currency shifts. Food becomes currency. Fuel becomes currency. Medicine becomes currency. Tools, batteries, filters, seeds, warm clothing, anything that directly keeps you alive or keeps your life stable becomes the new wealth. And daily life changes in small, humiliating ways. You flip the light switch and nothing happens. The fridge becomes a silent box. Your phone becomes a flashlight and a calendar instead of a portal to the world. Cooking becomes work again. Heat becomes effort again. Travel becomes slower, smaller, and riskier. The world gets bigger again, measured by what a human body can reach. And this is where communities either become stronger or they fall apart, because isolation sounds tough and cool, until you realize you can't stand watch forever. You can't fix everything yourself. You can't be sick and still keep everything running. So, quietly, the most stable places would be the places that cooperate. Not perfectly, not with hugs and harmony, but with a basic agreement that survival takes structure. Shared labor, shared skills, shared watch rotations, shared knowledge, shared food production. In cities, the adjustment is harsher because cities are delivery systems. Without delivery, shelves empty fast. Services degrade. Tension rises. Some people leave if they can. Others adapt where they are. But the city stops being a convenience machine and becomes a collection of small zones trying to stay safe. In rural areas, life might slow down, but it can stabilize sooner because the core resource, land and production, is closer. Farms become valuable. Rural towns become trade centers. Repair skills become gold. Kids learn by doing because survival becomes the curriculum. The old split between thinking jobs and making jobs collapses. The people who can repair, grow, build, treat, and organize become the new professionals. Now here's the part that's strange to say, but it's true. Even in that world, life doesn't become only misery. People still gather. They still tell stories. They still sing. They still laugh, sometimes more honestly than before, because shared hardship has a way of stripping the fake stuff off life. A new culture grows out of necessity, and over time, slowly the world starts stitching itself back together. Not as one big global machine, at least not quickly, but as regional networks. First small markets, then larger trade. Sailboats and rail before modern shipping fully returns. Local power grids repaired in pockets. Communication rebuilt in pieces. Technology doesn't vanish. It sleeps. It waits. And when people can safely revive it, they do, but with more caution, and usually with less appetite for endless growth at any cost. Borders eventually harden again, but they follow natural lines more than political fantasies. Rivers, mountains, fertile valleys. The world becomes more regional, more local, more careful. And maybe the biggest change is psychological. The illusion of invincibility is gone. People stop believing systems are permanent. They build backup plans by instinct. They value stability over speed. They value cooperation over convenience. So if you're asking what the world looks like after the last missile stop, it probably isn't ash everywhere. It's a planet trying to live without the invisible threads it used to take for granted, and slowly learning how to tie new ones. Stay safe out there. Keep your circle tight, keep your basics covered, and don't let comfort convince you the system can't break.